Welcome back to Amplifying Our Voices. I'm your host, Patty Hayak. Thank you for being here. In today's episode, I sit down with Marie Kelly. She shares defining moments that shaped her, from early experiences with bias to the powerful decision to rewrite the narrative others tried to place on her. She opens up about navigating corporate America as the first in her family, the role of faith and self belief, and the mental burnout that became her wake up call. Let's dive in. Hello, Marie. Thank you so much for being here today. I am so excited to hear a little bit about your story. I like to start with, where does your story begin?
Well, from a personal standpoint, my story began from a two-parent household. Back in the day, people kind of stayed together no matter what. I think for me, I almost wish my parents would have divorced because there was just a lot going on within the household. But my mom was an entrepreneur, ended up being a beautician, owning her own business. My dad was a supervisor for a roofing company. There was seven of us, four boys, then came me, and then a few years later came two additional girls. So I was kind of like in that middle, first girl, learned responsibility, took care of the family, was always kind of the responsible one in the family, and a little bit of the person in the family that folks kind of looked to if they needed guidance on something. As a young child, my intuition has always been like at its peak. And I could really tell folks from the beginning if they had a good heart. I could just look in someone's eyes and just know if they were a good person at a very, very young age. So that was a little bit more of what my drive, I think, was around my family. My dad and my mom, their work ethics. My mom was a go-getter. My dad was kind of a quiet man, didn't say much, but when he did speak, you knew it. He just ran for the hills. So my beginnings was pretty, we wasn't like rich and we wasn't like dirt poor because we never, with seven kids, we were never on welfare, took anything from the government, but we knew we wasn't like way up there either. But we had family, we had love, and it was pretty good. It's a pretty good childhood, all
Okay.
things considering.
When you think about your journey, is there any chapter that stands out the most?
Um, the chapter that kind of stands out mostly for me is when I got pregnant. And I went to a doctor's office, and I remember his name to this day. I won't say it. That's how impactful it was for me. He told me that he would recommend that I have an abortion because statistics states that someone of my nature, meaning my color, my race, if I was to have a child out of wedlock, that child would grow up to be a thug or be a statistics, if you will. And I looked at him and I'm like, you don't even know me. How could you make that assumption? And he pretty much said that was your option because your child is going to be nothing and you likely will end up on welfare. And so when I walked out of the office that day, I said to myself, I'm going to show you what a statistic is because I'm not going to be one. So I wanted in my mind to redefine what a person would say a statistic was. And that kind of was kind of the biggest driver in my entire life. Everything that I did was behind that little saying in the back of my head, get an abortion, you're a statistic. Get an abortion, your child is not going to be anything. So I, in a little bit of a kind of negative way, I started working and I never stopped. Work
Oh,
was my top priority no matter what. I worked in retail. I was working open, close, late. Didn't matter what time of day it was. I was always there. I missed out on a lot of activities with my son because of that. But for me, it was all about proving that I would not become a statistic, and neither would my son. So that stuck with me for a long time. And I still think about it every now and then, but I think about it now saying, prove you, I prove you wrong, you know. So that was from a personal standpoint. That is something that really, really drove me throughout the years. From a professional standpoint, I remember when I started working in a clothing store. I was about probably 18, 19 years old. I was still pretty young. And I was waiting on this lady, and I had two friends. The manager name was Stacy and the assistant was Renee. And they were just the sweetest people I had ever met and both of them was Caucasian. I just loved them to death. They took me around their arms and they kind of like protected me. It was just that kind of love in the family on in that job. And I was giving this lady back her money and she said to me, "Put my money down there. Don't you dare touch me." I was taken back and I'm like, "What's going on?" And she looked at me. She said, "Do you think I want someone of your caliber or your type to touch me? Put my money down." Patty, I think that was the first time that I had ever, it kind of resonated to me that I was different, that I'm not like other folks that was giving me this love. And I must have cried. I can't even remember how long it was. I cried all at work. I cried at home and I was mad at my mom. And she goes, "Well, why are you mad at me?" And I said, "Because you didn't prepare me for such a traumatic event." Because my mother always sheltered us. She kept all of that noise away from us. She wouldn't let anyone talk to us or look to us different. We were just kind of more in a protective kind of state, I believe, with my parents. So we didn't know a lot of that. I was named after a Caucasian. My mother's best friend was a Caucasian. So I didn't see what I thought I would encounter as an adult because we just had the love. We had white people in our neighborhood. It was just a diverse kind of place. And we just never thought of people in that way until I started working. And that was my first encounter bias. And it lasted a long time for me. And that's when I kind of woke up and said, I am different. And I've got to prepare my son because if that happened to me, I can only imagine when he grows up. And if he didn't know kind of that this is what life is, I needed to really prepare him. So that was probably my first major encounter
Mhm.
dealing with racism. But I think I'm glad that it happened to me at a younger age than if I was in my late 20s or 30s figuring out life. It was different. It put a whole different spin on me and what I thought about people at that point. Those were two kind of big eye-opening things that kind of have driven me to kind of treat people the way I want to be treated. Although I may not necessarily agree with what a lot of people might do or say, you always have to love an individual because they're God people. I just took a whole different kind of look on life and how I would approach people as I get older. So yeah, it was the
Yeah,
experience.
I love that because you managed to turn 2 negative experiences into something to take a learning out of it or to turn into something positive. The
Yeah.
experience with the doctor, it motivated your drive. You had a drive from a very early age. And then the experience that you had in the workplace, you mentioned too, it taught you to just be kind and be loving to others. And I'm sure it might have felt a little bit maybe contradicting where you said, the customer was white, and at the same
Hmm.
time, your colleagues who were very kind and comforting to you were also white, so you got to
Yes.
see those 2 differences.
Absolutely. And I think that that's an important thing for people to just realize you can't take a rotten apple and necessarily think that that rotten apple is going to spread about everyone. A lot of times you're able to pick out those good apples before that rotten apple spoils the other. It's so important for people to not compartmentalize a group of folks. You
Mhm.
can't take an individual who do bad because it's amazing to me when we talk about people in crime. You can't think because there is a black person that commit a crime that all black people are bad. I'm
Right.
a black person, and I'm gonna tell you, there's some black people I would cross the street from. There's some white folks I would cross the street to be away from. So it doesn't matter to me if it's someone that's walking by me and I'm not feeling a comfort level of safety. I'm going to be across the street. I don't care what color or race you are. And it's so
Right.
important for people to really kind of understand that. And I hate to say this, in my opinion, I don't care for Trump. I want to be very kind of clear on that. But I think that the one thing that Trump has done that I think is very important, he has exposed a lot that was going on that was kind of hidden under the rugs that frankly we haven't really dealt with the right way. And
Mhm.
we haven't really we started it and then say things are calmer, so we're just now going to pretend that it's gone. and it
Right.
was never gone. It was always that little smoldering of smoke that was just waiting to get that spark. And I think that he bought that out of these, I want to say maybe this 10, 15, 20% of folks who is going to hate you no matter what. I mean, it's just, it is what it is. And that's just life, in my opinion. But I still believe that the vast majority of people in the world are good people and will not stand for hatred to go to the extent that it goes to some degree. And it doesn't matter to me if you're far right, far left. You can be imbalanced to whereas that's too much. People need to kind of come together and get more into the center and just understand that there are differences. There's going to be some people, Patty, you're not going to be able to change no matter what. And
Right.
those people you pray for, you go on. But I think the vast majority of people in the world are good people.
I agree. I have seen some of the kindest things. Being a mom of a disabled child, I have seen how people are just so kind, just random strangers doing kind
Yeah.
things for her, and so it's like moments like that remind me that there is more good in the world. And I try to focus on that. So thank you for sharing that. Switching gears a little bit to your professional life, you ended up working in corporate America. Can you talk a little bit about your experience as a person of color navigating the corporate space? And what was that experience like for you? And were you the first in your family to work in corporate America? Because that's also another different experience.
Yes, I was the first and only person in my family to work in corporate America. All of my siblings, with the exception of one, all of them was educated, mostly in the educational field. My sister is special aid. She was in that field until she retired. My brother is a teacher as well. So we have a lot of that within our family from a corporate environment. The exposure I got is probably an experience that I want to say it's been a fortunate experience, and there's been, of course, some unfortunate, situations that have happened. It's a different world. It's almost like you have to understand politics to some degree. And you have to understand human nature. You have to understand how to balance yourself. Because if you go in to a corporate environment, believing what you believe is like this, and it's black and white, and you can't see on both sides, it's only this way, you're not going to ever be successful in corporate. And I think from a politics standpoint, if you're working in a corporate environment, you have to be so careful because you can really jeopardize who you are as a person and living your own personal values. Every company have what they quote unquote say are the values of their company. But I think it's sometimes important when people are going into a corporate environment, especially, you need to understand what is the values of that particular organization because sometimes it may not align to what your personal values are. And when you do find a company where your personal values and the values that is outlined for that organization is pretty much aligned, that's probably an organization you want to probably stay toward. One that does not, either the organization will change or you will change if your
Mm.
value system is so totally different. And I think what happens, people think more about the money and they don't necessarily take in consideration that this company, may not have good ethical practices, or this company may not think about sustainability and, other practices that is common for humanity. Do you really want to work in that type of organization? People don't really think about that when they are looking for a job. When I went to corporate, the value system meant a lot to me.
Mhm.
And for the most part, especially early on, it was very important to the organization. And so it aligned very much to what my personal values were until later on. I was seeing a shift down the road. So I would say not to lose yourself when you're going into a corporate environment. And that's what I try to practice and try to continue to do throughout my corporate career.
So you were the first in your family. So, and you're mentioning a lot of things that I think people don't realize. Like you said, even like the politics. For me, that was something that I found out as well. I've always known the Marie that's always been advocating for herself and had thick skin. That's the Marie that I knew, the confident one, always speaking up for herself. So, did you always have that? Did you have like mentors that helped you learn that, or how did you learn navigating that space? And how did you learn to navigate the politics and all of that when you were the first? No one told you how to do it.
Yeah. Patty, I have to give credit to I had an Aunt Daisy and I had a mother who were and other older people in my life who was God fearing. And I really believe this, and I'll say this until the day I die. My mother and aunts and folks who was looking after me when they say it takes a village, they did a lot of praying back in the day. A lot of praying. And I really believe that they prayed so much that we had like some surpluses with God. And it when I went into corporate, it was it was very much a major challenge off the bat. I was the first Black female to be in a particular position. And I ran right away into roadblocks with mainly Caucasian men who thought I should be put in my place. And I was a manager at the time, and I had a guy he was a supervisor. And he thought he knew more than I knew. He was, how dare this girl come in? And it's a Black female. He would give me the hardest time. Everything I would tell him to do, he would challenge. And there was always this birdie in the back of my head saying, stop fighting with him. Let him do it and let him fail. And so I would step back and give him just enough rope to let him make his decision and him to time after time after time, he would see that had he listened, his life would have been a lot better. And everything that he messed up on, I made it a point that he cleaned it up. And so after a point, he started recognizing me a little bit differently. And so it started there, and I took that when I went into the corporate environment. And from that perspective, I have to say some of the smartest people I've ever worked for at corporate, and one person in particular was the youngest person I ever worked under. I was older than her. I had more work experience than she did. She was vibrant. She was soft spoken, but she was smart as a whistle. Going into that role when I started in corporate, I learned so much from her from a standpoint of seeing her how she presented herself, how calm she was, and she was a Caucasian gal. But she took a risk on me because I was working in retail within this company at that time. She came and she offered me a job. Patty, I went in and the job she offered me, you had to have a particular skill. I didn't have that skill. But what I did have is I was a fast learner. And
Mhm.
I said, I don't have the skill, but I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy these books and teach myself that skill. I went out, purchased these books, and when I had my interview, I'm talking this language to her, and she's like, "Whoa, did you go to school for that?" And I'm like, "No, I just kind of learned it on my own." And she took a risk and hired me. Not only did I respect her for the fact that she hired me into a role that was a brand new initiative for the company, she took a risk on me, and I was scared. I mean, like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? But it taught me that no matter how young a person is, you can always learn something from an individual if you open yourself up to seeing things that is not just at surface level. And I started that, and I want to say that because I had people that who had prayed up for me, I had guardian angels looking out for me, and the fact that this person was the first person that I was blessed to encounter. I think everything happens for a reason. And
Mhm.
I think it was my time to learn a different lesson that was going to help carry me through some of the challenges that I was going to eventually come across while I was at corporate. That's kind of, if I want to say, my aha moment, and the things that I could leverage to keep me afloat was having those type of allies and having special people in my life who entered my life for some reason at some point that was really inspirational for me.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. So you did talk a little bit about allyship and mentorship. What would you say contributed to the success of your career journey?
Think probably for me is that I never gave up on me. I always felt that I had it in me, although I had some fears and some anxieties that stem from childhood. I just believed in myself, Patty. You either find yourself getting beat down and just giving up, or getting beat down and say, you know what, that's that, and I don't want to hurt like that no more. So I'm gonna do some things different to make sure that I don't go back down that road. I was always a person who learned the first time. You didn't have to, I didn't need a lot of lessons. If I got burnt once, I'm probably not ever gonna get burnt again. And if I did get burnt again, I hold myself totally responsible because I let it happen. And I really didn't have to. But sometimes someone told me a long time ago that I was a champion for the underdog, that I have a tendency to root and probably stay too long with people who just may not have the knack or the skill for it. But I'm like, oh, they got it. They got it. They got it. So I'll keep pushing and keep whatever until I had to realize one time when I was working with an individual, he was my subordinate, and I said, okay, this is not the right fit. And I had to kind of start looking at that a little bit different. But I believe that it really was me believing in myself. And let me give you a story. When I started working at a clothing store, I remember I had a manager. His name was Bob, and I was nervous as heck. I was handling money kind of for the first time, like a lot of money. And he was teaching me how to do something. It was a return or something. I'm like, well, what am I? I'm looking, he goes, well, I'm not going to do it for you. You know how to do it. Just sit there, think about it, and do it. And I looked at him and I'm like, but you're right here, so you can just help me, right? And so he said, no. At the time, I was really kind of mad at him, but it was a teaching, it was a lesson. And the lesson was start believing in yourself, girl. It's those kind of things that happened throughout my life. Self assured was one of my top 5 strengths. People didn't really know what self assured meant. Some people, oh, it means you're cocky, you're arrogant. No, self assurance for me is that I believe in myself and my ability to do something. I realize that I'm not 100% in everything. A lot of times, what my good is a lot of people's excellent. And I needed to really kind of understand it and have faith in my abilities to do things. I think that's what really drove me from a standpoint of just, champion through things. It's just believing in myself, believing that I was a good person, believing that I was always going to look at people and love them because that is what God has put us on this earth. You're supposed to love your neighbor. I don't care what you do as long as you're not trying to influence that on me or some child or some elder person who can't take up for themselves. But I am going to love you as an individual. And that's how I'm going to move through life, is looking at people as people and loving them for who they are, meeting them where they are.
Thank you. Okay, switching gears a little bit to how did burnout affect your either physical health or mental health? Can you talk a little bit about your burnout?
Pat, I'm going to be really, really honest in this statement. My burnout was not really burnout of the job per se. I think what was happening with me from a burnout perspective, and people have to be really careful, especially when you're ambitious and you're trying to show that you can do a job. My problem for burnout didn't necessarily have to do with the job in itself. Burnout for me occurred when realignment, when you're laying off people. So you get tons of good leaders that actually leave an organization. So now you got less good leaders, and then you got a whole lot of folks that are in roles that are not qualified to be in those positions. And now they're leading the team. And so you have an unbalance there. Unfortunate for me, I started being on teams where I had more of the former. I had more of individuals who were not good leaders or did not have good leadership traits, didn't know how to be a leader, more tactical, wasn't visionary, wasn't strategic, none of that, wasn't, didn't know how to kind of keep a team together and understand the diversity of folks going into a room. I had one person that was a leader, had never managed a person, and of the one person that they had managed was not a person of a different color, different race. So they were totally, when they had a team that all of a sudden had all of these diverse people, had no idea how to deal with the different components of that team. And so for me, the burnout occurred when you have leaders like that and you continuously have or exposed and working with leaders like that, you feel like you're using all your mental powers to always help that person stay up while you are not growing and learning and getting what you need because you're too busy trying to get that person from what you learned probably when I was 19 years old. This person is now in this big role and they don't even have that foundation. So you're there trying to help and support them. It mentally becomes draining after a period of time. And my burnout occurred due to those type of incidents, not necessarily the company per se in the work that I was doing. I just had a lot of leaders that did not have good leadership traits or were not ready to be leaders that helped me get to what I call that mindful burnout. And I do want to say this, Patty, I can blame those leaders for a percentage, but I am going to blame myself for a higher percentage because it goes back to what I was saying. I have this had this knack that there's always good in people, but that person is the underdog. I'm going to help that person succeed. I'm going to, da 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 da. When I probably should have said, this person really shouldn't be in this role. You need to move on and find something else. Instead, I stayed and I stayed and I stayed. And I knew that leaders in that state was going to continue to use me because they knew that my work ethic was high and that I was going to do what it takes to make the team look good, to make them look good, because that's what I was taught. That's what my role is, to make my boss look good. And I could have stopped it and I didn't. So I do hold myself to the same account that I hold those leaders to, because I should have gotten out long before I let it get to a mental burnout state. So I think mine was more of a mental burnout that floated into a health burnout that really forced me, because it goes back to a lot of times you need to listen to God.
Mhm.
God was giving me warning signs saying, okay, you probably need to move on, but I'm fighting it. And I God said, "Well, if you're not going to get it, I'm going to help you get it." And he gave me a wake up call because I had a health crisis that forced me to make changes.
Mhm.
And it was the best thing that ever happened and the worst thing that ever happened. That was my lesson learned, and everything happens for a reason.
Do
But
you have
more mental burnout than anything.
Can imagine. So, burnout is such a common topic that a lot of people experience at some point in their
Yeah.
life, whether it's even if they're an entrepreneur, they're constantly working and doing something that they love. And so there's so many different ways I think that people experience burnout. And I think that maybe not that a lot of people understand that they're burnt out while they're going through it. Would you have any advice to someone that is experiencing burnout and may not necessarily know that they're in it? Like how can one tell that they're experiencing burnout?
Patty, I had all kinds of warning signs. And I think that what a lot of us don't do is we don't listen to our friends and our family. I remember my husband, my mother-in-law, son, people was telling me, God, you work too much. What is going on? You're always working. And for me, because I didn't feel like, I still had energy and I was still, I'm fine. Those were little warning signs for me. And I should have listened and I didn't. And
Mhm.
I would say to people, when you start hearing people, especially people unexpected, like my mother in law was saying something like, why does she think I'm working so much? And it was dawning on me all of the times while we were having a family event, I would have my computer or I was doing this or I was doing that. It was something always work related. And I started thinking about that. I have warning signs. I would say listen to folks and really think about not take offense to what people are saying because these little birdies that kind of come in your ear, we just kind of ignore them. And that was something that, after you get a chance to sit back and think about things, I'm like, God gave me all kinds of warning signs to say,
Right.
you need to stop. So I would say really listen to people and know that they're probably coming from a good place. And see if there's adjustments that you need to make. Also, I would say a lot of times when you're working, especially for individuals who are fast learners. And you find that in your job, you have a tendency to receive or do a lot more than probably the normal scope of what the team is being asked to do. You probably want to look at that and look at the leader's reasoning on why you're getting so much more to be able to do and when you can do it in a less time and other folks are they're going home on time, they're taking their lunch and smoke breaks. They're all of the things that you kind of take for granted, and you feel like you're always on the run. Then
Mm,
there's some unbalance there. So I would be saying, check your surroundings and make sure that work is equally distributed based on what your role is and based on, your expertise surrounding your job. I would say just look at the clues from that perspective too, to signal if there potentially could be burnout or burnout also leads to health issues, so be careful with that.
absolutely. I agree with that so much. I've experienced burnout in the past as well. Like you said, the people in your life. I remember coming home and this was a really long time ago. My daughter was like, I don't even know. She must have been like 8 or 10. And I would come home and just complain about work. And then she'd be like, Mom, why don't you just get a new job? Right? Like someone so young
Yeah.
noticing how I would constantly come home and complain about something. And to her, it was easy. It's just like, duh, you can remove yourself from that situation. When it comes to the health, listening to your body, I would
Right.
feel that I would have less energy when I would come home.
Hmm.
And there was a point for me where I was, you know what? I'm tired of coming home and not having enough energy for the people that I love the most. And so
Yep.
that's what I knew for me. It's okay, something's off here. Like listening to your body and listening to those that are closest to you. I love that. And I want to go back a little bit to the leadership that you mentioned that because that was a percentage of it. We see this a lot where people are promoted into they're great individual contributors and they haven't had that leadership experience. Would you have any advice for organizations that are promoting people into first time leadership roles?
Yeah, there's a saying, it's called promoting to incompetency. And what happens is I can have the greatest supervisor in the world. He or she could be, awesome at their work. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person is an awesome leader of people. And so
Right.
we go and we promote this person to now, let's say from a supervisor to a manager. Now they're leading folks. They have a certain skill set and a trait that they are good at, but they're not good at transposing or in translating that onto other people to build a strong team. And one of the things that I think a lot of companies don't do a really good job at, back in the day, they used to do all types of seminars and all types of trainings and things like that to prep and prepare a person to get to another level. Now they just promote them. They don't have any training. There's not anything planned to train. It's called on the job, get in there, get your foot wet, and let's just see where everything, chuck it at the wall and see what sticks. And it's not good when you're running multi-million dollar companies because people don't leave companies, they leave the leader. And that is so important because companies set themselves up to have people issues because of this lack of not following through and looking at individuals. If there's people, there should be a strong training plan for individuals that are in these roles that you feel like they have the aptitude or the ability to be able to go in and eventually lead people. You can find out, Patty, pretty quick if a person possesses skills that is going to be individual to them and they don't have leadership traits, or sometimes, Patty, they don't really even desire to have it. They just there for the money, and maybe there's different roles and different things that they can do to maybe create different positions where maybe that person is good at what they're doing. Maybe they can be individual trainer for their skill set, but not necessarily mean that that person would lead a team. But I think that they need to kind of change that and go back a little bit to where it used to be, where you find people, you interview them, you make sure they have the aptitude for the position and the role, and you provide training and quality training for those individuals to be able to succeed. That's just almost when companies start cutting back, training is one of the top areas that they cut back in. Top
Right.
areas. They'll start chopping. And to me, it was always, why would you do that? Because a trained individual, the more you train, the more you learn. You really are going to weed out folks and you're going to see them more obviously if they are not trainer of people. If they're just, this is just their skill set, then you need to make sure that you understand that and not go promote to incompetency. And that's just what kind of happens. And I think companies need to go back and kind of look at that.
So we've talked a lot about the professional space. Is there any advice that you have for people entering the workforce and specifically to the minority, people of color? Is there any advice or words of wisdom that you would share with them?
One of the things that I think is important for minorities to understand going into a corporate environment, I know that you want to always be your authentic self, but I want to just throw this out there. You may want to be your authentic self, but do the company you work for want to see you in your authentic self? And I think that people get confused by that because our company can say, bring your authentic self to work. Well, my authentic self may not be what you really want to see because my authentic self is being straight up, straight point with the person. They really, what they're saying is they want a polished version of your authentic self. A minority person, in my opinion, can't ever be 100% your authentic self. You just can't. And if you have an organization that lets you do that, I would love to know who those companies are. And we need to get flags and champion those companies and give them free publicity or whatever, because for the most part, they don't. And I do believe that a lot of times when we say bring your authentic self, I wouldn't always want to bring my authentic self to my job. So I'll give you an example. I always felt, or people made me feel like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't always a clear communicator because then my anxiety and some things would happen. I don't like public speaking, but that happens. I had issue speaking as a child that kind of, when I get nervous, it runs into that same thing when I'm nervous at presenting or doing something like that. Because my authentic self is who I am. I speak naturally. And I made this a conscious choice, Patty, and it did hurt me to some degree. I didn't want to go into a corporate environment, start speaking big words and all proper, and people think that, she's very articulate. She doesn't yell. She's not the angry Black woman. She's very professional. I mean, I can calm down and I can talk and speak fluently as anyone else. And then go and that morph into me. I go home, I'm talking to my mother, and I'm all of a sudden talking to my mother as if I'm better than her. I made a conscious effort to be who I am at home and be that person at work. And you either like me like that or you don't. I either get a promotion demonstrating that those behaviors or I don't. And many times I wasn't looked at as the promotable one because I didn't go out and put my chest up. Patty, I'm fully educated. I went to college twice, 2 degrees. But I didn't want to be someone who I wasn't. And that was not natural. You should be your authentic self. You may have to polish it, tweak it a little bit for work. So, for example, I've seen some of my folks when they come to work. I was like, why is that person wearing that? What do you think they're going? I mean, they kind of forget, okay, you're in a work atmosphere. It's those kind of things.
Right.
Dress, read your room, know who your audience are, and, dress accordingly. Don't dress like, you're fixing to go to the nightclub, things like that. You know what I mean? So those kind of tweaks, it's necessary to be able to be, function in a corporate environment. But if those values align with what your values are, they will accept you in your authentic form. If not, you're just in the wrong organization. And I would also say always open your mind to be able to be with others who don't look like you. And I would say understand that people know what they know and people don't know what they don't know. And a lot of time it's up to you to help educate folks. And folks can't get educated if they're never exposed to you. So get out of your comfort zone and make sure you expose yourself to other folks who don't look like you too, to make sure that you can kind of get in there and let them kind of understand who you are, what your culture is like, without cramming it down people's throat too. That's
Thank
my
you.
advice from that perspective.
I like that. Yeah, we could talk about that topic, I think, for a really long time on what does bringing your authentic self to work and what do organizations mean when they say that? And to your point, do I even want to bring my authentic self? I'm from a point of view that there are I don't want to lose myself, like you said, like my values and who I am. I want to show up the same at work and in my personal life. But there are just some things where I hold very close to my heart and that I don't think that everyone should have access to. And so
Right.
I think there's a balance and there's a yes, bring your authentic self, but to a certain degree. So I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Shifting from the professional and going into more of like things that you're passionate about. You have a message for the next generation. Tell me a little bit about what words of wisdom would you have for the younger generation?
Okay. First of all, Patty, I want to apologize to the younger generation because I think that we have done such a disservice to one teaching them um, about experiences and the importance of democracy. And I think that we, along with them, their children, their grandchildren, their great great grandchildren, it's going to take a long time before this country is in a better place from a financial standpoint. So my biggest thing, one is to vote, and I want to send the message. If anyone would listen to just these words, just the few minutes of anything that I discuss here, don't take for granted your vote. Don't use it as some type of fun act to elect or promote the folks who serve you at an incompetent level. Treat people kind of the way that not only you want to be treated. If you want to be treated like crap, then treat people the way God expects you to treat people. If you don't believe in God, then treat people the way you would want someone to treat someone that you love. If you love your mother, your sister, your brother, whatever, and they got stuck out on the street, needed help, would you want someone to come to their rescue? Think about life in that manner because it comes back when you give and think in that fashion. People who don't vote and people who don't educate themselves to be able to get factual news, to compare and contrast, to make informed decisions. Because the only way that you're going to save the democracy is to sit back and look at your responsibility and what role you played into getting us where we are today. I would say look at different organizations such as Ground News. It is a company that presents news out to the vast audience on a bias rating. They will identify if it's far right wing. They will identify if it's more left leaning, far left, or if it's more central. Get your facts. Don't go far left. Don't go far right, because you're gonna hear a different story. You're gonna hear what they want you to see and say, right or left. And I'm talking about the extremes. I'm not talking about right or left when you're right in the middle. I'm talking about people who will fall off a cliff for somebody because they believe that person is God. I'm not talking about those guys. I'm not talking about the ones that are so progressive that no matter what, they're going to go off a cliff. If it's going to bankrupt the country, they're going to do it. I'm not talking about those people, because you're not going to be able to change those people's mind. I'm talking about the general population who wants fairness across the board. Vote, and vote being mindful. Not voting is everybody's responsible if you're not voting. It's a irresponsible act, in my opinion. Democracy is in jeopardy, and that I think we need to save our democracy. We need to treat people with fairness. You may not agree with everyone, their lifestyles, whatever, but you are supposed to love everyone and treat people with dignity. And so my biggest thing is to vote and to not take your vote for granted.
Thank you for sharing that important message, Marie. To wrap this up, what do you hope someone listening takes from your story?
I hope that someone listening to my story take away the fact that no matter what happens in your life, that everything happens for a reason. Never to give up on yourself, believe in yourself. I know that kind of seems like a cliche to a lot of people, but I think you have to dig deep a lot of times and believe in yourself and keep pushing through. Have faith. Hopefully, you have faith in God, that God is going to see you through. Um, and just understanding that this too shall pass, when it's something, that's not so good that may happen to you, but that you'll get through it, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Beautiful. Thank you for that wonderful message. Thank you for spending time with me today to share your story. It's always a treat talking with you, Marie. So thank you.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, follow, and share this with someone who might need it. Stay tuned for the next one.